The next person that we're going to look at in relation to the creation of queer theory, or contributions to queer theory, is Eve Sedgwick. And her book, Epistemology of the Closet, is one of the landmark books in the area. What she wrote is that any social binary that defines subjects in society, especially the binary of heterosexual-homosexual, is not a relation of symmetry between two terms. On the contrary, social binaries are two terms constituted by a relation of asymmetry that one term presides and subordinates the other. In more practical terms, this means that the act of identifying homosexuality and homosexual life as other has subordinated it to and coerced it into navigating a world that has been organized to favor heterosexual individuals. We can't set up contrasting terms and expect that in the grander scope of human behavior and human consciousness that humans are going to take those contrasting terms and see them as equal or of equal status or as some sort of a social equivalent. It is in our conflict theory type nature that we're going to see one as preferred and the other as not, and that's going to set up an unequal power structure. Michel Foucault, in The History of Sexuality, wrote that sexuality must not be thought of as a kind of natural given, which power tries to hold in check, or as an obscure domain, which knowledge tries gradually to uncover. It is the name that can be given to a historical construct. This ties into the idea of symbolic interactionism, and the idea that we create our definitions of reality and then behave accordingly. Foucault's work challenged how sexuality was understood in popular and scholarly discourses, as well as how power was understood. When institutions with the power to impose a label named a group homosexual, it created opportunities for the group to appropriate and redefine the term to create community and make political demands. Judith Butler is perhaps one of the biggest names when it comes to LGBTQ+ studies in queer theory, and this video I'll make available to you on Canvas. She said that to say that gender is performative is a little different because for something to be performative means that it produces a series of effects. We act and walk and speak and talk in ways that consolidate an impression of being a man or being a woman. In a nutshell, the concept of performativity says that gender is something that we do. It is not something that we are. Gender performativity is about how we choose to present ourselves to the world outside of ourselves in a way that they will interpret and understand and is congruent with how we see ourselves. Anne Fausto Sterling is our next person, and she identified 5 distinct sexes, including 3 intersex categories, and all of this was based on genitals. So we need to acknowledge up front, for some folks this could constitute a trigger warning, that she uses the term hermaphrodite to describe 3 of the intermediate categories, the intersex categories. That term, for the rest of us who might not be aware, is now considered offensive in the intersex community. I'm providing it here so that I can be true to the language that she used given her time and place, but it's not a word that we want to carry forward in our own conversations. So the 5 categories or sexes that she identified were first the males at one end of the spectrum, and they are the definition of male that we have grown up with. Next would be the merms. These she identified as male pseudo-hermaphrodites who possess both testes and some female genitalia. Next in the continuum would be the herms, the true hermaphrodites. Next, the firms, the females who possess ovaries and some male genitalia. And finally, the females. She described the sexes as a continuum from male to female, with 3 transitional or intersex categories in between. While that was pretty groundbreaking for U.S. culture, Western culture, to look at it that way, her work was challenged by many because it focused too heavily on genitals and ignored the role of performance in determining gender. Consequently, it helped to focus contemporary ideas of gender on intrinsic qualities rather than physical ones. José Esteban Muñoz brought us the theory of disidentification. He examined how people whose identities make them a minority, for example, queer people of color, negotiate identity in a world that punishes and attempts to erase the existence of those who do not fit the normative expectation. He noted that queer people of color have been placed outside dominant racial and sexual ideology. As one student once questioned, they were trying to understand why it was they were twice marginalized. Partly for their race, that put them on the margins when it comes to dominant society, and then secondly for their sexuality. Disidentification is about managing and negotiating historical trauma and systemic violence. Rather than assimilating or rejecting the dominant ideology, the individual tactically and simultaneously works on, with, and against a cultural form. Using this survival strategy, the individual is able to rework the cultural codes of the mainstream to read themselves into the mainstream. Next, Charlene Carruthers offers a Black queer feminist lens. She says this allows us to see and understand that our identities make us vulnerable to multiple types of oppression. Liberation for all Black people can only be realized by lifting up the voices and experiences of historically silenced and vulnerable groups within Black communities. Queer, trans feminine, poor, differently abled, and undocumented bodies are the ones most vulnerable because they are traditionally marginalized groups within already marginalized communities. By taking a queer Black feminist lens, one recognizes and humanizes Black bodies that have been made inferior. Students find that using queer theory when it comes time to start doing analysis is rather challenging. So I offer this as another way of looking at it, how to apply it to circumstances and situations. Queer theory can be used to study the shared experiences of all communities navigating a world where identity is often seen in binary distinctions, such as straight-gay, man-woman, white versus person of color, educated versus uneducated, that make alternate spaces uncomfortable or invisible, such as we could use it to analyze the civil rights issues, the marches or the movements, where we're looking at that binary distinction between people of color and the dominant privileged white group. We can use it to explore cultural norms or attitudes of a specific generation, where we're making a dichotomy between, for example, millennials and boomers. We can use it for understanding issues of privilege and marginalized groups, discrimination in the workplace, the school, or other environments, and, for our purposes, issues related to gender identity or sexual orientation. Some terms to keep in mind with queer theory are essentialism, which is the philosophy or the belief that all things, including categories like race, sex, gender, and sexuality, have a set of distinct qualities or characteristics that exist prior to our awareness and understanding of them. Next is performatives, the means by which gender is continually demonstrated through speech, action, dress, and so forth. Performativity is that gender identity is not natural, and it does not emanate from an essential truth that can be located on or in the body. The use of performatives to effect social action and change is the way that we express our gender identity to the outside world. Heteronormativity is the belief that heterosexuality, predicated on the idea of a gender binary, is the norm or default sexual orientation. Cisnormativity is the assumption that a person's gender identity matches their biological sex. The idea of a gender hierarchy notes how genders are ranked in terms of power and prestige. Typically, this means that men are ranked higher than women. Gender parallelism, which is also known as gender complementarity, notes contrasts with gender hierarchy. It describes a condition in which socially recognized genders have similar levels of power and prestige, but possibly in different areas of social life. In Canvas, I will make this video clip available for you. Love has no labels. And as you watch it, just make some notes for yourself. I won't make this one an extra discussion on Canvas just because we didn't have time to cover it in class. But think about how you would use queer theory to explain this video to another person. Consider its view of society, with ideas of what's normal versus deviant when it comes to behavior and sexualities and how those are socially constructed. Look for examples of key concepts such as inequality, non-normative expressions of gender, sexuality, and identity, and the performatives that people are using. The view of the individual, keeping in mind that for queer theorists, sexuality is fluid, plural, and continually negotiated rather than fixed. How social order is maintained. Even for the queer theorists, they recognize that in an unequal system, it's through heteronormativity, cisnormativity, and these binary categories that we maintain the current status quo. So what evidence do you see of that in the video clip? And it doesn't have to be you're looking for examples of how the video is helping to perpetuate it. It can also be how it's challenging it, because this is still about social order. Finally, look for examples of its view of social change, where it's seeking to destabilize the binary contrasts, such as gay and straight or male and female. The next video that I'll make available for you on Canvas is One Story, Four Lenses. And I don't want to give away too much about this one. That one's about 10 minutes long. And when you're done, you're going to practice applying all four theories to this one. So look at it from a functionalist perspective, a conflict perspective, an interactionist perspective, and from a queer theory perspective. The idea here is not that I am expecting you to be able to apply all of these perfectly, nor do I expect you to agree with every interpretation that you come up with. The idea here is that it's a cognitive exercise in flexibility of thinking and using these concepts, just practicing them so that you'll be able to pull them out of your hat in the future when you do want to use them. You should have already received in an email, in an announcement, information or a layout on the sociological perspectives. I will make that available in this mini module I'm creating for week 2 as well. And the final thought, as I'm about to run out of time, is that queer theory is both theory and political action that explores the oppressive power of dominant ideologies, particularly those relating to sexuality, and the economic impoverishment they cause to